going on, guys? Kirk here from MotoGear TV. Thank you guys for tuning in once again. I want to get things started by talking about the latest interior mod that I did to the M2. Let's get started. Alright, so for those of you who've been following me on the journey, you know that I've been doing a lot of modifications both to the exterior and to the interior of the car. Today I wanted to go over the latest mod that I had for the interior, and that has to do with the gauge faces. Now this is something I really wanted to do ever since I had the 335i. I really thought that the gauge faces, especially for the M2, were kind of plain, not really the aesthetic I was trying to go for. So I decided to do some research and look at some of the different options I had. Now for me, I wanted something that was going to stand out but still had a very factory OEM look, and I think I really nailed it on the head, especially with this one. Now for me, especially being a OG pre-LCI M2 owner, most of you guys who own the pre-LCI M2s will notice that the gauge cluster is very plain. It's gray, it's boring, there's not a lot going on. And unlike the M3, M4 that comes with these nice white LED backlights, we're kind of stuck with the orange LEDs. So in order for me to, add my little touch to it, I decided to go with some custom painted gauge faces. Now this one is from a company called Venoxy. It's a European company based in Poland. They've been doing custom gauge faces since 2012, mainly for German cars, BMW, Audi, and Porsche in particular. They also do gauge faces for motorcycles as well. Now, one of the things I really liked about the Venoxy gauge faces, it's not your typical vinyl overlay that goes on top of your existing gauges. This one is actually a complete plastic replacement. All their products go through a very extensive process to be manufactured. Everything is laser cut from a CNC machine. The text and the colors are all printed on. They follow the same standards just as the OEM gauges, and to be honest, I was really impressed with how they turned out. Now I decided to go with the light blue color option. I think it ties in nicely with all the other blue accents I have on the car. From the seat belts to the steering wheel to the emblems on the car, I think it matches perfectly. On top of that, they even give you the option to have the speedometer in miles per hour or kilometers. Now because I'm in the US, I decided to go with the miles per hour. This basically eliminates the kilometer reading that you'd see on the OEM gauge. To me, it's a much more cleaner look. I think it complements the cluster very nicely, not too much going on, and everything, again, very visible. The numbers are sharp, everything is pretty much where it needs to be, and I kind of appreciate the attention to detail they really had. Now the installation for this was pretty straightforward. However, it was very time consuming. For me personally, it did take a little bit longer to install than I expected it to, simply because I wanted to make sure that everything was taken apart properly. I didn't want to have to damage any existing parts on the gauge cluster or damage any screws. Luckily enough, Venoxy was able to supply us with some pretty straightforward and detailed instructions. In order for you to remove the gauge faces, however, you're going to need a T20 Torx bit. There are two T20 Torx screws that hold the cluster in place. Once you get those removed, you're going to have two connectors that power the gauge itself. You're going to have to disconnect those. Now you want to be very careful when you're taking the gauge out, simply because it's connected to a wire in the back. Worst thing that wants to happen is for us to damage anything, so we're going to take our time in taking it out. So there's two clips holding in the gauge in place. The first clip you're going to have to press in the center and pull it out directly below, like this. And then the other one, you're going to have to push it in from the side. Should be pretty easy. Slides right out, and then you can take the gauge out. Yeah, you're just gonna have to maneuver it and find that sweet spot to kind of slide it out properly. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so as I mentioned to you guys before, these are the two clips. The first one, press down in the center, slide it back out, and then the second one, there is a tab on the side. You press that in, slide it out as well. So a very cool thing about these gauge faces is the instructions that come with it. Everything's pretty much detailed and outlined step by step on how you're supposed to do everything. For us to get started, we pretty much need to remove the back plates of the cluster. So we're going to start right here. There's actually 4 screws, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom, and then 6 clips all around to remove it. So that's going to be the first step to get it out, and then we're going to show you exactly what's inside. Now in order to remove these screws, you're going to need a Torx bit. I'm going to put the size on the screen right now just so you guys are aware. It's pretty small. Please make sure that you have different size screwdrivers, different size Torx bits, just to make sure that you aren't damaging any of the screws. I did damage a few of them. We'll have to go ahead and replace it in the future, but for now I just wanted to at least show you guys how the process was step by step, and And to be honest, again, it's not that hard, but it just takes some time. Now, in going through the process and pulling apart the gauge cluster, once you get to the inner casing, there are a few other screws that are held in place, as well as a few other clips. Disassembling it was pretty straightforward because of the instructions. Next thing would be to get this back plate off. 2 white tabs on the side right here and right here. You need to unclip those, and also 2 black tabs on the top. Once that happens, you'll be able to remove this back plate and you'll be able to see the circuit board. Definitely want to make sure that you're taking your time. You don't want to break any of the tabs. Now this is what the back circuit board looks like. You want to be very careful. You don't want to damage anything right here. Alright, next step in the process, you're going to have to remove these needles. Now to do that, we're going to be using a trim tool. I'm going to be very gentle. I'm going to have this cloth underneath it just to make sure it doesn't scratch any of the parts. This is going to be my first time doing it, so hopefully I don't break anything. Next step, I'm gonna flip it around. Now there is 3 screws holding the circuit board in place. One right here, here, and also right here. There's also some white tabs holding it in place all around. 2 on the top, 1 on each side, and then 1 on the bottom. Once you remove the screws and the white tabs. Now normally you're supposed to remove these 2 ribbons, 1 right here and 1 right here. I found that it was much easier for me to just keep them in place. So we're just going to flip out the circuit board and keep going. Again, when I got down to the bare bones, I was able to remove the stock OEM gauge face, and these are held in by some silver rings. I'm going to show it later in the video. I will say the quality of the Venoxy one is a little bit more sturdy in my opinion. The OEM gauge faces were pretty thin as far as the material that they used. They were very flexible. However, the Venoxy ones, those things don't move. They're solid. The finish was very nice and very comparable to the OEM version. Putting them in place did take some time, however, just to make sure that everything was being fit up properly, and that's because the shape of the Venoxy gauge itself is slightly different. Now the main component in holding the gauge faces together were the metal rings as well as the silver rings that surround the gauge face. Now these played a major factor in getting the fitment properly. Big thing to note, once you're reinserting those rings into the gauge face, you don't want to press down on it. You just want to have it sit down nicely and neatly. Especially for the silver rings that surround the top of the gauge face, you want to make sure that all the tabs are pushed in properly and everything is seated in place. Now there is a black screen that is right behind the gauge face. You want to make sure that it doesn't bubble up once you put the silver ring on top of it. Other than that, you just want to keep checking as you're doing it. Now when you're putting the needle on top of the gauge face, you don't want to add any extra pressure to it, simply because if you press down on the needle too much, you're going to cause too much friction in between the face and the needle, and that way when you reinsert the gauge cluster into the car, the needle isn't going to move. Now you can kind of determine the level of how much you want to push it in by just moving the gauge needle a little bit. That'll allow you to see if it has any additional play. And for this install, having the needle sit on top and having a little bit of play is what's going to be most important, especially when you're going to be using it in the car. Alright, so hope you guys enjoy that quick little cinematic. We are losing a little bit of sunlight, so I just wanted to show you what the gauge faces look like in person after the install. Again, I will say that I am very impressed with how everything turned out. It does have very similar lines, especially compared to the factory one. As you guys can see, everything looks 3D and the needles line up on point where it's supposed to be. Everything's zeroed out. If I turn on the car right now, just gonna kind of show you what it looks like illuminated. Again, pretty much similar to what the factory one is. The output of light for the gauge faces itself does look pretty good. It actually looks even brighter than the OEM version, so I'm very happy about that. And to me, look at this, guys. It gives the interior that nice pop of color. Like everything is just pretty much, you know, black and blue, fitting in with the overall theme of the car, and then you have bam, nice color gauge faces. I know a couple other YouTubers who do have a similar color theme. Viet F80 Ho, shout out to you for being an inspiration on this as well. If you guys haven't seen his channel, he has a F80 M3, same black sapphire metallic as me, and he does have a very similar setup as far as the blue and black theme for the interior of his car. Make sure you guys check out his channel as well. But again, for my car, definitely impressed with how everything turned out. I think it looks fantastic at all angles. It's really going to give this car a really nice pop, and pretty much, I think, for me, in my opinion, the interior of the car is pretty much 90% complete. There are few other extra bits that I'm going to be adding before BMW Invasion. If you guys didn't know, that's going to be next month, February 19th in Orlando, Florida. One of the biggest BMW car meets, at least in this area, that I've seen in a long time. It's going to be a very big event. Really looking forward to seeing everybody that's going to be out there. And on top of that, you guys are not going to want to miss the final reveal of the M2 with the interior and all of the exterior mods, and there are gonna be a few extra bits that you guys are definitely going to want to stay tuned for. Now overall, I will say that I am very impressed with Venoxy and their gauges. Quality, again, as I said, was very good in my opinion. No complaints with how it looks in the car. I think it ties the overall theme that I'm going with very nicely, and to me, I think it's an excellent addition to everything that I have going on. Again, I'm building this car for me and myself only. I hope that you guys can appreciate everything that we've been doing so far to it, and trust me, there's much more to come. Now, if you guys are interested in getting some gauges from Venoxy, please be sure to go check out their Instagram, also the website. I'm going to link all of the information in the description below. If you guys are interested in getting any of the parts that I have on my car especially, I'll be leaving the links for those as well. Now, didn't want to keep this video going too long. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you guys for watching again. Stay tuned for more progress on the M2, and until then guys, we're out. We're gone.